Hey there, this is Reg Kelly, Table in the Wilderness. Hope you're doing real good this morning. It's a beautiful morning out here. I want to talk to you this morning on something real serious that needs to be said. I want to speak to you on how the deterioration of biblical manhood got us Roe versus Wade and the slaughter of multiplied millions of babies. Back in the post-World War II days, and this is not to say that there's not always been sin, because man is a sinful, depraved creature, and his flesh nature is capable of anything. But after World War II, going up through the late 50s, and certainly as we jumped into the 60s, there became what we call a sexual revolution. And that was the breaking down of the walls that at least if you did certain things, it was no longer wrong or to be looked down or no shame connected to it. Let me just say this to you today. One of the base reasons, not the complete reason, but one of the base reasons that we have Roe versus Wade and the slaughter of millions of babies is because men cease to have a biblical mindset and a biblical underpinning to their conduct and their nature of life. And what I mean by that is we saw the playboy culture. And what it did was tell our boys and tell us men that if we weren't chasing women for explicit purpose of pleasure, that we weren't really men in the culture, in the society. There was a cultural shift that said to men, you can use women, abuse women, you can score with women, you can trash women and use them up, and you can experience pleasure without any responsibility, and you will be held to no accountability in the culture. So here's what happened. This went on for years, and by 1973, women were sick of it. They were saying, listen, you men are saying that you can have pleasure without responsibility, and us women have to bear the responsibility of it. If we have pleasure without responsibility, we have to carry the baby, and we have to endure the stigma. And basically what our culture said was, when we moved away from a biblical manhood basis, is we said that a man, he's a stud. If he goes out and scores with a bunch of girls or women, if he's out chasing women and climbing in bed with all these girls, he's a stud, man. I mean, he's the man. But the girl, she's a slut. You know, she gets pregnant, she's got the baby, she's carrying all that. She's the one that carried the stigma. So here's what happened. God pulled his hand back off this country and allowed, when biblical manhood began to go off to the wayside, and when I say biblical manhood, I'm talking about loving a woman, cherishing a woman, respecting a woman, being a protector, being a provider, okay? And loving them and not using them and abusing them for your own personal pleasure without being willing to accept the responsibility. So here's what women said. No longer will men be able to have pleasure without responsibility. We're sinners too. And we want to have pleasure without responsibility, so we've got to figure out a way to get rid of the baby. And of course, there's where your abortion situation comes. But that never came until men became playboys. And it became fashionable in the 50s as Hugh Hefner and the playboy culture told all the American boys growing up that unless you're chasing women and having sex with a bunch of women, you're not a true man. The exact opposite is the truth. Men, we are not true men unless we're able to bridle and control and live within the bounds of biblical manhood, our natural fleshly passions. Sex was designed to be enjoyed within the bounds of marriage. Anything outside of a man and a woman, anything outside that violates the law of God and becomes unbiblical manhood. And so I want to say there's a responsibility today to the men of America, and I want to encourage all the young men listening to me. Be a biblical man. Get back to, don't take advantage of women, and don't be, and I'll do another clip sometime on wicked women leading innocent and unsuspecting boys into sin. But we have the primary and priority responsibility to be the men that we ought to be, like Joseph was, even when Potiphar's wife tried to seduce him. And we need to be like Boaz in the Bible, not take advantage of a woman, but protect a woman and treat her as if she were our sister and treat her if she was our daughter. The Bible in the New Testament clearly says that men are to treat women, if they're older than you men, you're to treat them as a mother. If they're younger than you are, you're to treat them as a daughter or a sister. That excludes all taking advantage of men in a sexual or sensual way to women. But what got us to the murder of millions of babies was when men abdicated their biblical manhood to a fleshly playboy culture that said, oh, go out and chase the women and lay around and get women pregnant and don't worry about what happens to the kid. And we took no responsibility for the children. And so the women said, no, you're not the only ones going to get to play around without any responsibility. We will not carry the responsibility and we will murder the baby. And by the way, then men joined in with that because that kind of got rid of all the evidence and that got rid of all the burden and the problem that might occur because of their sin. This is Reg Kelly. I'm going to be dealing with this more in the future about the abdication of manhood in America. But men, here's what I want to challenge you. The Bible said that Moses, when he was at the well of Midian, they were shepherds driving the women who were drawing well. They were driving them off. And the Bible said that Moses stood up for them. We need to get back in America where men are protectors of women, that they take up for women, that they don't let women be cussed out and treated like trash in front of them. And in saying that, in closing out today, I want to say that if you want to read about this stuff in detail, I'd encourage you to get my book, order my book, Walk the Sea with Me. It's in this book, it's in this historical fiction novel that I really put into detail what I'm trying to talk to you about this morning. I'd encourage you to order this book, and it will deal with this in this young lady's life, what I've talked to you about the abdication of biblical manhood in America and what it does to people's lives and the death and destruction and misery that it brings. You can order this book by going to tableinthewilderness.net, and you can PayPal it or you can send by check, whatever, but you go to tableinthewilderness.net and get you a copy of Walk the Sea with Me. This book is full of spiritual applications for the day in which you and I live, and it starts in 1973 when Roe versus Wade occurred, and it will show you how Satan destroyed this nation through the abdication of biblical manhood. This is Reg Kelly. I hope to see you again on the broadcast. Thank you for listening. Until next time, so long.